For decades, the Queen's final wishes were believed to be sealed, protected, untouchable. But what if the most powerful man in Britain discovered too late that those wishes had changed? Not by his hand, not with his knowledge. In a private chamber far from public view, King Charles came face to face with something that would shake him to his core and threaten everything he thought was secure. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. He had walked into the legal briefing expecting formality, not revelation. The meeting was scheduled as routine and orderly confirmation of provisions already understood, already accepted, already woven into the quiet architecture of royal continuity. For a man who had waited a lifetime to ascend the throne, the mechanics of inheritance were supposed to be settled ground. The Queen's will had long been described as meticulously finalized, safeguarded under layers of protocol, shielded from speculation. There was no reason to anticipate disruption. And yet, as the documents were placed before him and the wording began to unfold, something felt wrong. It started subtly, a reference to an addendum, a revision dated only months before the Queen's passing. Charles initially assumed it was minor, perhaps a technical clarification, a small redistribution of personal effects. But as the language became clearer, so did the magnitude of the alteration. This was not a footnote. It was a deliberate adjustment, a clause restructured, authority subtly rebalanced. He stopped the reading. The room went silent. Advisors who had served both mother and son shifted in their seats, careful with their expressions, careful with their words. The date was confirmed again. The signatures verified. Everything was legally sound. Everything was executed through proper channels. And yet, the king had not been informed, not privately, not symbolically, not even as a courtesy. The omission hung in the air heavier than the change itself. Charles did not raise his voice. He did not react theatrically, but those present would later describe the stillness as more unsettling than anger. His hands remained folded, his gaze fixed on the page as if the ink might rearrange itself into something more familiar. A lifetime of preparation had taught him discipline. But discipline could not silence the question now forming in his mind. Who authorized this? The Queen had always been strategic, reserved, calculating in ways the public rarely understood. If she altered her will in her final months, it was not impulsive, it was purposeful. That realization struck deeper than the legal implications. Someone had stood beside her. Someone had witnessed her intent. Someone had carried this revision forward without informing the future king. And that meant access, influence, trust bestowed elsewhere. Beneath the weight of protocol, something personal flickered. Not outrage, not resentment, but something quieter and more painful. A sense of distance, of conversations that may have happened without him, of concerns she might have held but never voiced. The possibility that in her final calculations, she had foreseen risks he had not fully recognized, that perhaps, even in love, there had been caution. The will was more than paper. It was a message, and messages delivered after death carry a particular kind of power. As the briefing resumed and the clauses continued, Charles understood that this discovery would not remain confined to a single room. Changes of this magnitude ripple outward. They test loyalties. They reopen old rivalries. They force unspoken tensions into daylight. He had inherited a crown, but in that moment, he also inherited a question. And as the final lines of the revised document settled into certainty, one truth became unavoidable. This was not an accident of paperwork. It was intention. But the real shock wasn't just that the will had changed. It was who stood to benefit from those changes. Royal wills are never impulsive. Every word is measured, every signature witnessed. So how could significant amendments be made without the heir's knowledge? The deeper the palace insiders looked, the clearer it became this wasn't a clerical oversight. It was deliberate, calculated, and orchestrated by someone who understood both royal protocol and the Queen's deepest concerns. In the days following that first unsettling briefing, timelines began to matter. Dates were revisited, meetings were retraced. What initially seemed like a minor adjustment now demanded scrutiny. The amendment had been recorded quietly, just months before the Queen's passing, at a time when public appearances were limited and private counsel carried greater weight than ever. It had not been rushed. It had been prepared, drafted, reviewed, finalized through the same meticulous legal channels that had protected the crown for generations, which meant one chilling reality: this change did not slip through cracks. It moved through corridors designed to prevent surprises. The legal pathway was airtight. Senior solicitors confirmed a revision followed established royal protocol. Witnesses were present. Documentation was complete. Nothing about the process was irregular, except for one absence. Charles had not been notified, not as Prince of Wales, not as successor, not even informally. For a monarchy built on continuity, that silence felt louder than any accusation. Whispers soon circled a familiar name, a trusted confidant who had been by the Queen's side in her final stretch. Someone loyal, someone discreet, someone who understood both her private ties and the institutional pressures weighing on the crown. It was said that this individual had been present during those final revisions, offering counsel as the Queen reconsidered certain assumptions about the future. If true, that presence carried weight, influence, access at the most intimate level of royal decision-making. And then came the murmurs that unsettled Charles most. Suggestions that in her final months, the Queen had grown contemplative, reflective, not doubtful of her son's love or dedication, but concerned about the evolving landscape around him. The monarchy was shifting, public scrutiny was sharper, internal divisions more visible. Perhaps, some speculated, she wanted safeguards, quiet adjustments, to ensure stability in uncertain waters. But if that was her motive, why shield it from him? Evidence began to point toward intentional distance, communications routed through intermediaries, briefings scheduled without his knowledge. It wasn't an overt conspiracy. It was subtler than that, a pattern of discretion that now felt deliberate. Charles, who had spent decades preparing to inherit not just a throne but a legacy, found himself confronting the possibility that even within the palace walls, not everyone had placed full confidence in his path. The shift encoded within the will was understated yet unmistakable. It did not dethrone, it did not disgrace, but it redistributed influence, empowered alternative channels, strengthened certain hands. The language was precise, almost surgical in its restraint, and that precision told its own story. This was not emotional, it was strategic. Privately, Charles began to question more than the amendment itself. He questioned conversations he had not been part of, decisions that may have unfolded in drawing rooms he never entered. Loyalty, once assumed, now felt layered. Complex, he trusted his mother. That trust had never wavered, but trust in the surrounding circle, those who shaped her final considerations, was another matter entirely. What haunted him most was the possibility that this was never about wealth. Estates and assets were symbols. The deeper issue was authority, continuity, the silent architecture of power that defines how a monarchy survives storms. If adjustments had been made, they were not about diminishing him, they were about shaping the monarchy beyond him. And when Charles finally read the redistribution of assets, the implications became painfully clear. What if the Queen's final act wasn't symbolic but strategic? As the clauses were read aloud, Charles realized this wasn't a simple inheritance adjustment. It was a rebalancing of influence, a recalibration of trust. Entire estates, private trusts, and personal heirlooms had been reassigned. Some names were elevated, others quietly diminished. And for a king who believed continuity was assured, this felt like quiet correction. The redistribution did not arrive with dramatic language or open rebuke. It was written in careful phrasing, wrapped in the neutrality of legal tone, yet the impact was unmistakable. Certain assets Charles had long understood would consolidate under his direct discretion were now routed, differently placed into structured trusts, overseen by advisory bodies, or earmarked for other senior members of the family. The shift was subtle, but strategic. Authority that would have naturally flowed toward the monarch was instead being distributed outward, creating parallel centers of stability. More striking still were the beneficiaries who emerged strengthened. Figures who had often operated in the background suddenly found themselves entrusted with enhanced resources and independence. Financial streams that once reinforced the singular gravity of the sovereign now fortified separate branches. F. The royal structure. It was not fragmentation, it was reinforcement. But reinforcement of whom, and for what purpose? One estate in particular carried emotional weight, a property layered with memory, tradition, and symbolism long associated with the continuity between reigning monarch and heir, had been reassigned under revised terms, not removed entirely, not stripped of dignity, but repositioned. Its stewardship was altered in a way that signaled shared guardianship rather than automatic succession. For Charles, this was not about bricks or land, it was about signal, about meaning, about whether his mother had quietly chosen to diffuse power rather than centralize it in him. He confronted his advisors again, more directly this time, not with anger, but with clarity. Why had he not been informed? Why was he learning of these shifts only after the finality of her passing? The responses were careful, rehearsed even. The Queen had been resolute. The adjustments were her personal decision. Timing had been delicate. But beneath the diplomatic explanations, a deeper truth lingered. Someone had believed it necessary to protect this decision from him. That realization landed harder than any redistribution of wealth. It was the emotional blow he had not anticipated. Not a public slight, not a constitutional challenge, but the possibility that in her final calculations, the Queen had harbored concern. Not about his devotion, not about his preparation, but about the pressures surrounding him, the alliances, the optics, the evolving expectations of a modern monarchy. Had she doubted his capacity to navigate them alone, or had she simply sought to strengthen the institution beyond the limitations of any one ruler? The will began to feel less like inheritance and more like instruction, a coded blueprint for a monarchy entering uncertain terrain, each redirected asset read as rain, forcement, each elevated beneficiary a safeguard. This was not favoritism. It was architecture. The Queen had spent a lifetime preserving the crown through wars of opinion and waves of scandal. If she adjusted the flow of influence in her final months, perhaps she had foreseen fractures invisible to others. Charles felt the weight of that possibility. He had inherited the throne at a time of transition, when tradition collided with scrutiny. The monarchy was stable on the surface, yet fragile beneath. Public trust required more than ceremony. It demanded resilience, and resilience, his mother seemed to suggest, could not depend solely on him. As the implications settled, one understanding became unavoidable. This was not an emotional act. It was preparation. Preparation for turbulence. Preparation for a reign that might face pressures unlike any before. And as Charles absorbed the full breadth of the redistribution, he sensed that the Queen's foresight extended even further than estates and finances. That the most explosive amendment wasn't financial, it was constitutional in spirit. Buried near the end of the revised document was a clause few expected. It didn't strip Charles of power. It didn't name a new monarch, but it introduced oversight, a safeguard designed to activate under extraordinary circumstances. And suddenly, the room felt colder. Because this clause wasn't about inheritance, it was about contingency. The wording was restrained, almost clinical, yet its implications rippled through the air with unmistakable force. It outlined the formation of a contingency advisory structure, an internal council empowered to step forward if the stability of the crown were ever perceived to be at risk, not to replace the king, not to override him outright, but to guide, to intervene, to preserve public confidence should events threaten to erode it. The very existence of such a mechanism suggested foresight. It suggested preparation for a scenario no one dared define aloud. The conditions were carefully framed. Phrases like erosion of public trust, institutional vulnerability, and exceptional national concern appeared within the legal language. They were broad enough to be flexible, yet precise enough to be intentional. It was not difficult to imagine circumstances under which those phrases could be interpreted expansively. Political turmoil, public scandal, internal fracture. The monarchy had weathered storms before, but this clause implied the Queen anticipated more turbulent waters ahead. What unsettled Charles most was the tone embedded in the Queen's phrasing. She did not write from suspicion. She wrote from caution. Her language carried a subtle emphasis on perception, on how the monarchy is seen, how it is trusted, how it survives not merely through authority, but through belief. It was as though she had acknowledged a fragile balance between reverence and relevance, and she was determined to protect it, even if that protection meant constraining her successor. Legal advisors debated the interpretation quietly but intensely. Some argued the clause was symbolic, a final reassurance that the institution had safeguards beyond any individual. Others believed it carried genuine operational weight, capable of influencing decision-making at critical moments. The ambiguity was its strength. It did not confront the king directly, yet it cast a shadow long enough to shake behavior. In private, Charles wrestled with two words that now echoed louder than any others: extraordinary circumstances. What did his mother foresee? Had she witnessed subtle tensions escalating behind closed doors? Had she worried about external pressures converging at the wrong time? Or had she simply understood that modern monarchy operates under a magnifying glass unlike any in history? The clause did not accuse him of weakness, yet it introduced the possibility that weakness could one day be perceived. The emotional undercurrent was unmistakable, not humiliation, not betrayal, but a quiet fear of diminished authority. The throne he inherited came with conditions, unspoken expectations that he must not only rule, but reassure, that he must not only lead, but withstand scrutiny without faltering. The safeguard existed not to undermine him, but to limit the damage, if he ever did. And then there was the subtle detail that sharpened everything. The advisory structure was not abstract. It had identifiable participants, senior figures with defined roles, individuals whose reputations carried weight within the family and beyond it. The clause empowered presence, not anonymity. Someone, perhaps more than one person, had been positioned deliberately as guardian of stability. That realization reframed the entire amendment. This was not a mother doubting her son. This was a monarch fortifying the crown against uncertainty. Yet the psychological impact remained profound. Charles could not ignore the possibility that his reign was being preemptively reinforced, as if history itself had demanded a contingency. And when Charles discovered who stood at the center of this safeguard, tensions resurfaced. There it was clearly written. A name Charles knew well, a figure long respected, sometimes underestimated, and always fiercely loyal to the crown. The Queen hadn't just adjusted assets, she had reinforced trust in someone else. And in doing so, she created a silent counterbalance within the monarchy itself. For Charles, this wasn't a legal technicality. It was a message. The clause identified the senior royal who would sit at the heart of the contingency advisory structure, a steady presence empowered to guide the institution if extraordinary circumstances ever demanded intervention. It was not a ceremonial role. It carried defined influence, the authority to convene council, to steady internal divisions, to act as guardian of continuity should turbulence threaten to overwhelm the throne. In simple terms, the Queen had chosen a stabilizer, someone she believed possessed the discipline and loyalty to protect the crown, without seeking to overshadow it. Their history stretched back decades. This was not a sudden elevation. The named royal had been a constant figure beside the Queen through crises and transitions, offering counsel rarely seen but often felt. They shared a rhythm of understanding shaped by years of quiet collaboration. Where Charles sometimes expressed passion and vision, this figure projected restraint and unwavering duty. The contrast had never been hostile, yet it had always been present, two distinct temperaments orbiting the same center of power. Charles's relationship with them was layered, respectful on the surface, occasionally strained beneath it. There had been moments of alignment, moments of disagreement, moments when ambition and caution collided in subtle ways. Nothing explosive, but enough to create tension, masked carefully by royal decorum. Protocol had always smoothed over friction. Now, that protocol concealed something sharper, the knowledge that his mother had formally codified trust in another's judgment alongside his own. Whispers within palace corridors suggested the decision had not been spontaneous. Conversations had taken place. Private debates weighed the optics and the implications. Some advisors reportedly argued that embedding such authority could be interpreted as doubt. Others insisted it was foresight, not skepticism. The Queen, according to those close to her, listened more than she spoke, and when she decided, she did so quietly and decisively. For Charles, the emotional impact was complex. This was not open rivalry. It was something more restrained and therefore more powerful, a reminder that even as sovereign, he was not singular in the Queen's final calculus. The safeguard did not strip him of dignity, yet it subtly diluted the idea of solitary command. In public, nothing would appear altered, but behind closed doors, the balance of influence had shifted by design. The optics were delicate. If the clause were ever revealed in full, speculation would ignite. Commentators would question whether the Queen anticipated instability, whether she doubted her son's resilience, whether internal divisions ran deeper than acknowledged. The monarchy thrives on an image of seamless unity. Any suggestion of preemptive oversight could fracture that image. The very safeguard meant to protect the crown could become the spark of controversy. Yet, as Charles studied the language again, a quieter understanding began to form. His mother had spent a lifetime defending the institution from both internal missteps and external attack. She knew that leadership, especially in a modern monarchy, requires reinforcement. This decision was not about replacing him. It was about ensuring that if pressure mounted beyond expectation, the crown would not stand alone. Slowly, DTE narrative shifted in his mind. This was not a verdict on his capability. It was a shield for the monarchy itself, a structure designed to outlive personalities and protect legacy. The Queen had not positioned a rival. She had positioned a guardian. And perhaps in her final act of stewardship, she believed that shared strength would preserve what solitary power could not. But as tensions simmered inside palace walls, word of the amendments began to leak. The monarchy thrives on control, on silence, on carefully managed narratives. But within weeks, rumors began circulating, subtle at first, then relentless. Anonymous sources hinted at unexpected adjustments to the Queen's will. And suddenly, Charles wasn't just dealing with private shock. He was confronting public speculation about his own standing within the crown. It started with a whisper in a respected column, a vague reference to last-minute revisions that had caught even senior figures off guard. No names, no direct accusations, just enough ambiguity to spark curiosity. Within days, that curiosity turned into commentary. Commentators spoke of internal recalibration. Analysts dissected phrases like safeguards and redistribution of influence. What had been contained within palace walls now breathed in the open air of public debate. The leak did not appear reckless. It was measured. Someone familiar with royal processes had spoken carefully, revealing just enough to imply significance without exposing specifics. Media insiders sensed something unusual. Royal wills are rarely discussed, and when they are, the narrative is one of continuity and harmony. This felt different. This felt like adjustment, under pressure. Speculation ignited quickly. Was there division within the royal household? Had the Queen lost confidence in her heir? Was the advisory structure a sign of precaution or quiet mistrust? Headlines stopped short of accusation but lingered dangerously close. The idea that a reigning monarch could be subject to internal oversight fascinated the public. It suggested fragility beneath ceremony, human tension beneath tradition. Public debate widened. Supporters of Charles dismissed the whispers as exaggerated interpretation. Others framed the amendments as a masterstroke of foresight by the late Queen. The monarchy, once unified in mourning, now found itself subtly reframed as an institution managing internal recalibration. Every appearance, every speech by Charles was examined for hidden strain. Was he steady? Was he defensive? Was he compensating? Inside the palace, advisors urged restraint. Silence protects stability, they reminded him. Engaging the rumors would legitimize them. Denying them might amplify them. The safest path, they argued, was composure. Let the headlines exhaust themselves. Let speculation fade without confirmation. But maintaining composure while absorbing private upheaval demanded a discipline bordering on isolation. Charles carried the burden visibly, only in the smallest ways, a measured pause before certain public remarks, a tighter cadence in private briefings. He understood optics. He understood that kings do not flinch publicly, yet internally, The emotional weight was relentless. It is one thing to wrestle with a mother's final decision. It is another to do so under the gaze of a nation eager for narrative. Within the family, reactions diverged. Some figures distanced themselves from the noise, doubling down on unity. Others appeared quietly empowered by the public's fascination. The very existence of the advisory clause shifted internal dynamics. Conversations carried new undertones. Authority, once assumed, felt subtly negotiated. Tension sharpened between key figures, not explosively, but perceptibly. Shared appearances were scrutinized for signs of warmth or coolness. The possibility that private safeguards have been activated in anticipation of instability now fed the impression that instability already existed. The irony was inescapable. Above all, there was fear not of scandal, but of erosion. The monarchy survives on trust. If the public began to believe that internal safeguards were necessary, what did that imply about leadership? And if Charles appeared defensive, what message would that send about confidence? The storm was not yet a hurricane, but it was gathering momentum, and Charles understood that managing perception would require more than silence. It would require clarity, perhaps even confrontation. Yet behind closed doors, the real battle wasn't about headlines, it was about trust. There are moments history never records, private exchanges that shape public destinies. In a quiet chamber away from cameras and courtiers, Charles reportedly sought answers, not from lawyers, not from aides, but from someone who may have known the Queen's intentions intimately. What was said remains guarded, but those present described the atmosphere as charged, emotional, and transformative. The meeting was not ceremonial. It was not rehearsed. It carried none of the polished restraint that defines royal appearances. This was personal. Charles entered not as a monarch addressing protocol, but as a son grappling with the final choices of his mother. He did not begin with accusation. He began with a question, direct and unfiltered. Why? Why was this safeguard necessary? Why was he left outside the final deliberation? The words were controlled, yet beneath them simmered restrained fury, the kind born not from insult, but from hurt. Across from him sat the figure placed at the heart of the advisory structure, the one entrusted with quiet authority. Their defense was measured but firm. The Queen, they explained, had not acted from doubt but from duty. She had watched the shifting landscape of the monarchy with clear eyes. Public sentiment had become volatile. Internal dynamics more complex. She believed strength required reinforcement. This was not about limiting him. It was about protecting the institution from unpredictable storms. Charles listened, but listening did not mean agreement. The emotional conflict was unmistakable. Duty demanded composure. A king must not appear wounded by structural safeguards. Yet the son within him felt something more fragile, an ache at the thought that his mother may have prepared for contingencies without trusting him fully to weather them alone. He had waited decades to carry the weight of the crown. To discover that the weight came balanced with conditions felt like an inheritance wrapped in caution. The argument returned repeatedly to one central idea. This was protection, not punishment. The Queen's foresight was legendary. She had survived crises by anticipating them. Embedding a safeguard was consistent with her lifelong strategy. It was an extension of her stewardship, not a verdict on his capability. The distinction was subtle but significant. One implied mistrust. The off-air implied responsibility. Gradually, something shifted. The conversation moved from confrontation to reflection. Charles began to see the architecture beneath the emotion. The monarchy is not sustained by confidence alone. It survives through structure, through layered resilience. His mother had not designed a shadow over his reign. She had designed insurance for its survival. The advisory role was not a rival throne. It was a stabilizing anchor should the waters grow turbulent. Still, acceptance did not arrive instantly. It came in stages, through pauses, through reconsideration, through acknowledgement that leadership is not diminished by support. The crown he inherited was not merely symbolic, it was conditional, bound by expectations that extend beyond personal ambition. To rule is to be accountable not only to tradition, but to perception, to history, to the fragile bond between sovereign and subject. In that quiet chamber, Charles confronted a deeper truth. Trust within a monarchy is not permanent. It must be earned continually, not just from the public, but from those closest to the institution. The Queen's final act was not a withdrawal of faith. It was a challenge to prove it justified, a challenge to lead in a way that rendered the safeguard unnecessary. When he emerged from that conversation, the tension had not vanished, but it had transformed. Anger had softened into resolve, hurt into clarity. The crisis was no longer solely about amendments to a will. It was about the definition of his reign, whether he would resist the framework placed around him or rise within it. And as the dust settled, Charles faced a decision that would shape how history remembers him. He could fight it, challenge it, quietly neutralize the safeguards placed in his path. Or he could embrace them, turning what felt like doubt into demonstration. In the weeks that followed, subtle shifts began to emerge, not retaliatory, not defensive, but deliberate. Because if the Queen's final message was about safeguarding the monarchy, then Charles had one choice: prove her instincts right. The first decision he made was silence, not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of control. He resisted the temptation to counter the narrative, to dismiss the advisory structure as unnecessary or symbolic. Instead, he allowed it to exist without resistance. In doing so, he signaled something far more powerful than defiance. He signaled stability. There would be no public rift, no visible struggle for dominance. The crown would not fracture under scrutiny. Strategic appearances followed, carefully measured engagements that emphasized unity rather than hierarchy. When he stood beside the senior royal empowered by the safeguard, the optics were unmistakable. Calm, coordinated, purposeful. It was not performance, it was reassurance. The public saw collaboration where rumor had predicted rivalry, and that contrast began to shift perception. Behind closed doors, reconciliation deepened. Conversations once edged with tension softened into clarity. Charles acknowledged the Queen's foresight openly, in private, not as concession, but as recognition. He understood now that legacy is not preserved through pride alone. It requires humility, the willingness to accept structural support without interpreting it as weakness. That acknowledgement marked a turning point. Gradually, his leadership style reflected that evolution. Decisions were communicated with greater emphasis on collective wisdom. Advisory councils were not sidelined but strengthened. Transparency, within the limits of tradition, became a quiet theme. The monarchy's image began to transform from rigid authority to composed resilience. Where critics once sensed vulnerability, they now observed discipline. Public trust does not shift overnight. It adjusts in increments. A steady speech delivered without defensiveness, a collaborative initiative launched without fanfare, a deliberate refusal to fuel speculation. Each gesture accumulated, reinforcing the impression of a king who was not threatened by safeguards, but elevated by them. The narrative began to change not because controversy vanished, but because response overshadowed it. What had initially appeared as a subtle dilution of authority became something else entirely. By embracing the structure his mother left behind, Charles transformed perceived limitation into institutional strength. The advisory clause no longer hovered as a shadow. It stood as testament to foresight working in harmony with leadership. Instead of undermining him, it fortified him. The monarchy entered a new phase, guarded, yes, but also adaptive. Tradition remained intact, yet it was no longer inflexible. The presence of contingency planning suggested maturity, not fragility. It acknowledged that survival in a modern era demands reinforcement. And in choosing not to dismantle what was placed before him, Charles demonstrated that sovereignty is not diminished by shared vigilance. Still, redemption did not arrive wrapped in certainty. The underlying question remained unspoken, but persistent. Had the Queen simply prepared for general instability, or had she anticipated specific challenges that had yet to fully surface? Charles sensed that her amendments were not merely about the present, they were about the unpredictable future. In embracing her framework, he did more than stabilize his reign. He honored her final lesson, that the crown endures when leaders prioritize institution over ego. Yet even as composure returned and headlines softened, The deeper mystery lingered beneath the surface of royal continuity. But the question lingers, did the Queen foresee more than anyone realized? Perhaps the true power of the Queen's final amendments wasn't financial or political. Perhaps it was psychological. A reminder that the crown is bigger than any one monarch. That legacy requires vigilance, and that even a king must answer to history. As whispers fade and documents remain sealed, one truth stands undeniable: those changes were not an accident. Long before her final days, the Queen had mastered the art of thinking beyond the present. She did not govern for applause, she governed for endurance. Her reign had been defined by patience, by the quiet understanding that institutions survive not through force, but through foresight. The amendments to her will now felt like the final extension of that philosophy, a carefully constructed message that the monarchy must remain adaptable, reinforced, and never entirely dependent on a single personality, no matter how prepared or devoted. At its heart, the document carried the symbolism of conditional trust. Not distrust, not rejection, but a reminder that power within the crown is never absolute. It is stewarded. Charles, in inheriting the throne, also inherited that condition. The safeguard embedded within the will did not weaken him, it placed him under the same quiet discipline his mother had lived by for decades. Authority must justify itself daily. Continuity must be earned, not assumed. Under that quiet scrutiny, Charles began to evolve. His decisions grew more measured, his tone more deliberate. There was a subtle shift in the rhythm of his leadership, a consciousness of legacy not as entitlement, but as responsibility. The public sensed it too. Interest in the unseen dynamics of the monarchy deepened. Not out of scandal, but fascination. People leaned closer to the mystery of what had transpired behind closed doors, to the final conversations that shaped the future of the crown. Those ioms remain sealed in memory, known only to a few. And perhaps that secrecy is fitting. The monarchy has always balanced revelation with restraint, spectacle with silence. Its survival depends on that equilibrium. The Queen's final act of guardianship did not expose weakness. It reinforced humility. It acknowledged that even the most powerful sovereign operates within a structure larger than themselves. The will, then, becomes more than a legal instrument. It becomes a testament, a final lesson delivered without ceremony. It challenges every future monarch to remember that reverence is fragile, that public faith must be nurtured, and that foresight is the quiet architect of survival. The crown is not preserved through dominance alone. It endures through vigilance and grace. Yet even now, questions linger. Were there additional layers to her reasoning? Private concerns never voiced. Future storms she anticipated, but did not live to witness? The amendments answered some uncertainties, but they also left space for reflection. And perhaps that is the greatest mark of her leadership, leaving behind not just instruction, but contemplation. Because sometimes the greatest royal drama isn't fought on balconies or battlefields, but written in ink, hidden in silence, and revealed only when it matters most. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.